Hello, selectors, and welcome to the Life Burst podcast. Today, I'm not joined here by Tiffany, sadly, but I am joined by someone else who's maybe just as good. His name is Kevin, and he got sixth place at the Wixoss Spring Ceremony. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, hey, dude. I'm super excited to have you on the show. I said to you earlier, but I'll reiterate for our viewers that I think a lot of people are sleeping on Rei. So when I saw you do well with Rei, and not only that, with a list that was sneakingly suspiciously similar to something that I was thinking might be good, I wanted to grab you and put you on the show because I originally I thought, hey, the white blue version's really good, and the more I play tested, I was like, I think the blue red version probably is better. And then when you won and I got to see your list, I was stoked because I was like, this is exactly where my gut feeling was at.
Well, hey, yeah, thanks for reaching out and bringing me on and everything. I'm really excited to talk about it, and I definitely agree with you. I think a lot of people are sleeping on this deck, and even if this is a bit of a little different spin on it than I think a lot of people are expecting, I think it's surprisingly solid, and I had a pretty good time running it at the tournament. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the cool things too is so I'm a pretty big follower of the Japanese meta, so that way I can maybe look for trends in the future and let our viewers know what to maybe expect. But the red blue Ray wasn't really all that popular in the Japanese meta. It was a lot more popular to be the white blue. Sorry, the red blue Ray wasn't all that popular. The white blue Ray was more popular, and it seemed to be more, I don't know, resource denial-ish. And I don't think it really works with the meta that's presented here in America. We are at this interesting point where we're starting to diverge, and I think this Ray is even at sort of the forefront of it.
Right, I totally agree, and I mean it's pretty easy to see if you look at the different sites like WeCrossBox and things like that like our metagame is kind of significantly different than what things we're looking at over there. We're seeing a lot more diversity and stuff over here, and that's really cool, but that also opens up a lot more decks to being different or just viable when they weren't before over there. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, so for example, our Ray seems to be, or sorry, our Nova seems to be more popular, at least at the forefront of 0-3, where it was a solid deck over there, don't get me wrong, and probably tier 1, but it still seemed like No Limit Hirana was the deck to beat in many ways.
Yeah, it's almost like it took him a bit to catch on that Ray was as like overpowering over Hirana as it was, or at least in my opinion, overpowering over Hirana as it is. But once it sort of like caught on, over the course of that time period over there, it seemed like more and more Novas started to crop up.
Yeah, yeah. And interestingly enough, that you point out that too, Ray sort of right at the beginning of set 4 before the scourge that is known as DXM or PNX shows up, it started to become more of a red blue deck anyway, so we might just be kind of jumping the gun here in a good way, might be getting just ahead of the curve.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess that's always the power of like foresight over the Japanese meta. We can always look at what they were doing well with that it might have taken them a little bit longer to sort of figure out, and we can kind of start that right from like right out of the gate. Everybody's already ready with what the meta lists are going to be like as soon as the set drops and they start running that kind of stuff and practicing with it. And I think that makes things really interesting because our meta kind of goes in different directions because of that, or at least I think it does anyway, but it looks like it sort of went that way with at least P02.
Yeah, it does seem like maybe the Japanese meta goes for more synergistic or redundant decks, and we're starting to look at floor and ceilings maybe a little bit more, which is maybe why there's more card jockey in our meta than there is in the Japanese meta. And that's a whole topic that I think I'm going to tackle at some point on a different podcast. But I any chance that I get to talk about this crazy card theory stuff with other crazy card theory connoisseurs like yourself, I get excited about.
Oh yeah, meta talk is always like super fascinating for me, so I love hearing that kind of stuff.
So talking about the meta, what brought you? Oh, okay, so talking about the meta, I have a little bit of an incomplete understanding of what our meta looked like at the top 32, but I don't have a complete meta, so I'm not gonna put my foot in my face and say put it in my mouth and say that this number was this number, this number was this number. But what I've pieced together is that there was less there was less No Limit overall and much less Hirana overall, but there was a surprisingly strong showing of Reis, Novas, and Karjakis. Really was the three decks that I think stood out. And if you add the number of Bangs, Madokas, blah 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 into the mix into our sort of rock paper scissors theory that I did in one of my last podcasts, it ends up being almost evenly split with a little bit more on the control and the hyper aggro decks and less on the wall breaking decks like Ray and Bang, but there still was a fair amount present. So what brought you to the idea that if you weren't going to be rock and you didn't want to be paper, why did you want to be scissors? That kind of thing.
Right. So I've been kind of playing Hirina since back in December when Glowing Diva released. Like, I really like aggressive style decks. I really liked the deck. But I kind of like branching out, trying a whole lot of other stuff, and I've been doing a lot of that to help my friends playtest and things like that too. But one of the trends I've been seeing a lot of people talk about online and at the different locals that I travel to, because I'll sort of travel around my area and try different tournaments and things like that. A lot of people are really, really sick of Hirina. They're either sick of playing against her, they're either sick of playing her because they felt like they didn't have any choice. So that just seemed to be a recurring theme.
Yeah, totally.
Now for me, I'm not really sick of playing Hirina, but I know a lot of people are really, really, really excited for Nova because it feels like the first real alternative strategy for a deck. Like,
I
obviously
mean, you are absolutely speaking the truth here, being that I was like, ooh, control. This is something I've never played in Wixoss before.
Right, and it's like, we had things like Tamago, which were more of like a slower hand destruction style of deck and things like that, but it didn't really feel like they were super, super viable in like such a heavily aggressive format.
Yeah,
But with
yeah,
all
you
the
just
tools
lost
that
in slow motion.
Right. But with all the tools that are coming out with Nova now, it really feels like that you can really put the brakes on aggressive decks and actually slow the game down in a very meaningful way now. So, with that in mind, about a month out from release, I printed a whole bunch of cards down at the local print shop, and I just started testing things that whatever looked viable out of the new set. I printed out like 2 full play sets of. I just slapped a bunch of decks together, and I just wanted to test things to see what would be good. And one of the biggest things I was testing, because since I've been playing Hirina for so long, I want to keep playing a deck because I think, for me personally, I find a lot of value in really perfecting one thing. I really like dabbling in everything, but I really like sticking with one thing and perfecting it.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to leave Hirina unless I felt like I had to. So I proxied up some cards there, and I've started throwing myself against Nova after testing that one, and that matchup just felt awful. Like,
Yeah,
it was
miserable, right?
just an actual blowout. Like, I was tweaking all kinds of cards in the deck. I was slowing it down. I was trying to speed it up. I was changing life bursts. Just anything I possibly could. And the only thing I really found that felt consistently good was, getting a Nobunaga out for a double crush or something like that. But that didn't feel like a strategy I could consistently pull off 100% of the time. So even though I knew that the matchup wasn't going to be in my favor, I think I didn't expect how badly it wasn't going to be in my favor.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, so when I did similar to you, I printed out a bunch of cards and I just went ham with my locals trying to figure out all right, what are the matchups for everything. I even made this crazy spreadsheet that showed all right, if there's 40% Hirana, the weighted score of this deck should be this, which means this might be the best deck for the meta. And what I found was, no joke, 80% win rate for Nova against No Limit. It was like if you give Nova into a hands that they kind of know how to beat or just stall out a No Limit deck, they will stall out that deck.
Yeah, and I can totally see that with the 80-20 matchup and things like that, like you're saying. It really did feel bad. And I just didn't feel like I had a lot of options. Nova's base cards just turn off a lot of the removal options that I had outside of Akino Assist Elrig or something like that to
Totally.
return things back to hand. And I can't really depend on that alone to win me the game.
So why swap over to Ray? What was the thought there?
So the first idea I had was I wanted to swap to Monica. I've always really liked what Blue offered in Wecross,
Yeah.
but my big problem with that was I think Diagram is an extremely complex deck that has like a lot of modal decisions and things like that. I have some local players who are very, very strong with Diagram in general, and I didn't feel super confident that I'd be able to learn it in less than a month with like real life stuff going on and job
Totally
stuff and
fair.
traveling. So I wanted to, so I'll explore a little bit. So I tried dabbling a bit with Ray, and I liked that it felt familiar with No Limit, and it
Hmm.
incorporated a lot of the elements in Monica that I did enjoy, like the card filtering, the potential for lots of card draw, hand destruction, just option filtering. Like one of the things I really like with Blue is that I feel like when I'm piloting a deck like that, I have a lot of power through the options I have available to me at any given point. Like
Right.
the more cards I see, the more cards I have in my hand, the better I can perform or optimize based on the decisions that I have with those cards. So coming into the ceremony, I was still unsure if I wanted to run Ray or not. I up till like 2 days before I sat down for like 12 hours at a time, and I'm just mashing games against myself to test.
Hmm.
And really, up until about 4 a.m. of the day of the ceremony, I was still not 100% on Ray. Um, but there was a couple things I sort of went through my head before I ended up submitting my final deck list. I was expecting Hirana to be like 35% of the playing field, probably max.
Yeah, I thought
Um,
40 for me, and I
mhm.
was dead wrong.
And the big reason was, I think there's going to be a lot of players who wouldn't get their cards yet with how close the release date was to the ceremony. So they'd probably run what they did before. Plus, it's a easier deck to pilot compared to hopping onto something more complex. Even if we did see Diagram perform extremely well at the last ceremony. Um, and obviously expected more Nova players. I did expect more Diagram. I agreed with your point. I thought was super interesting in a previous podcast you did, where you mentioned how the sales data of some of the Diagram cards were going up, and that was a good indicator that possibly more people are going to be playing that. Um, but and that combined with how I started this conversation, saying like a lot of people are really sick of Hirana. Um, if my worst matchup with Ray is Hirana, and a lot of people don't want to play Hirana, and they're going to move towards Diagram or stay on Card Jockey because they like the look of the rigs, if they're going to move to Nova because they know it's good, then running some numbers for myself, I'm like, even if it was only 35% of the playing field, I
Hmm.
feel like a lot of the no limits might kind of get pushed down in the early rounds if they
Yeah,
run into things like Nova. So as long as I can get out of the first round or two of the tournament unscathed, I might not run into any Hiranas all day.
certainly. Yeah, you're not wrong about that. It's been becoming more increasingly clear to me that with WeCross, getting your early wins on these ceremonies is super important, because if you tech against a certain deck that you think is going to be very prevalent, then what might happen is when you get to that to the round 4, round 5, you'll start seeing those decks more often. But the rounds 1 through 3 are basically wild cards, and if you're placed low, you end up in this weird area that, like, the decks that weren't doing well are now in the low placements, and they kind of feed on the decks that were teched for other things.
For sure, yeah, 100%. Those early rounds are extremely important. And I've talked to other people who might have lost their early rounds in the first ceremony, and then they just play a totally different tournament compared to like me or some of my other friends who also
Hmm.
perform super
Hmm.
well. It's just they see such a different array of decks, and I kind of expected a lot of the Nova players and Diagram players to sort of bubble upwards, and hopefully Hirana to be left behind in like the lower brackets of the tournament. Obviously, still doing well and probably would end up pretty high up, but maybe not undefeated in those first few rounds. And I was
Yeah.
kind of banking on that.
So you took a very long term approach. You said, I'm going to play Ray because if I can get into that round 4, right, undefeated, then I have a better shot at taking the whole thing down if I get there.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Definitely a good thought. It's a different thought than some other people who are just want to play the most consistent deck in order to try to even get to the point where they're getting to the fourth round.
For sure.
So that's a great thought. And then you said you were this deck seems to perform well against Nova. That was, I assume you were testing that out.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't mention that. I was sort of I tested it performed a lot better against Nova than Hirina did for sure. Just a lot more of the it has like a twinge of hand destruction in there. I can
Hmm.
get the guards I need early on a lot more efficiently.
Hmm.
Just and some of the removal that's not power based, so it can go over top of the different roadblocks that Nova can put in front of you, whether that being my assist Larigs or raise once per turn ability or things like that. Um, and also, I mean, even against the rest of the meta, like Card Jockey, Diagram, moving away from Ray Assist and moving instead to Hirina Assist gives me more defensive capabilities for myself, as well as offensive capabilities that aren't necessarily power based.
Right. And I gotta point that out too. While looking at your deck list here, and it'll be on screen for everyone while we're talking about it here. It's very clear that you chose the same Elrig assists that I would have chosen, which is Hirana Stomp, Hirana on stage, Akino Rock, Akino Bye Bye. And with those, you end up with these, and yes, Hirana is 12,000 or less in the second half of it. Realistically, 12,000 is still pretty huge, and you can get rid of most of the things on the field with that.
For
Sans
sure.
like a Nobunaka or an Irish or something crazy like that. But you can always deal with that with your Akino Bye Bye instead. So it does seem like there's so much damage packed in the Elrig deck itself that you're free to make choices in your main deck that might not have to consistently deal with aggro. Like, so for example, if you're saying I'm opening up at least 5 lanes between Ray and my 4 assists, right? And I also have Glory Grow, which counts as a lane opening because it deals an extra damage, right? That's 6 out of the 8 damage that you potentially need to win this game.
Right, absolutely. It's just the power in the Elric deck, like it. I didn't realize going in how much more powerful it would feel compared to being a bit more limited when I was playing Hirina. Like having the Ray Assist is great because the card draw and things that Hirina needs for the gas. But once I swapped over to the Hirina Assist instead, playing Ray Center, I just felt like I had a wide array of offensive options to me to open up lanes where I could sort of focus the rest on the deck, not necessarily on opening as many lanes as possible like I did in Hirina, but sort of focusing instead on my card quality.
Yeah, and it's true with so much, and you do have a lot of draw discard. You are running the Hijikatas and the squids, which like those types of things. Um, you can still find the removal if things go south from your Elrig deck, and you still need to get more removal to get your lanes opened.
Right, for sure.
So let's talk about that. You decided to go with a limited removal package, which I think is correct in this, like we said. But what you are running for full copies of would be the squids. So how are these squids? It's a new card.
Squid performs amazing. It's in the matchups where I need it. So anything where so against Hirina, it's kind of a mixed bag because yeah, it draws me the card, which is really, really important for this deck because, well, one of the main problems with this deck is because I'm running a blue center, I'm not running a blue assist. Without the
Mhm.
card draw from blue assists, it becomes a lot more difficult to get cards in my hand, and it's very easy to burn myself out very, very fast.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Squid, once you hit level 3, really helps you with that because, as long as it sits there, it puts this body on the field that's going to draw me a card a turn. And since the game is running a little bit longer now, and up to maybe turn 5, turn 6, something like that, if they don't answer that threat, I'm just going to keep getting advantage off of it. Not to mention with a lot of the other cards in the deck, Gagiel, Regalicus, things like that, I can force discards on them as well. And also sort of do it in a way where I can dance around Xenocluster.
Yeah.
Because I can, if I have Gagiel already on the field,
Hmm.
and I play a Squid and I attack with Gagiel in the main phase and draw a discard, I'm forcing them to discard during the attack phase. They can't Xenocluster me.
Yeah, that's actually pretty big. I mean, you're right. It is a auto ability, which means it can happen at literally any time. And I do think that one of those times that you can do just a fun, interesting tech that I want to know if it actually showed up in your game. I've been thinking about it for a while, but with if you have a Squid on the field and you hit a Haniel life burst, you could potentially put out a Gokul and force another discard on their turn, right?
I guess you could. That is,
Yeah,
but I don't think that I ran into that, but it is a once per turn. It's not specific to your turn. It just has to
oh.
be your ability.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes you get in those corner cases where you're like, yeah, this matters. Like I was in a Nova game on the loot card tournament, and just to your point that there is a lot of Nova in here, I got first place at the most recent loot card tournament coming up.
awesome.
And I ran into one of those when uh, I attacked with Nova and chose not to get a guard, and then drew the last card of my deck, and I got a refresh, like because I planned to do the refresh there instead of draw one card like my opponent was, I think, making me do. And everyone started questioning. I was like, guys, it's an up to one ability. You really got to look at these cards because there are corner case scenarios that can save your life.
Right, for sure. But yeah, so like to your question, so against the hero in a matchup, it's it gives me the gas I need. But against other matchups, Firefly Squid feels amazing. Putting something down in front of like a Nova opponent that they absolutely have to answer because the advantage that this card is giving me, even if they tap it down with Fenrir, even if if they leave this card on the field, their discard strategy on me sort of starts to fall apart. I get
Yeah.
a bunch of extra cards. I force cards out of their hand. Um, a real key point of that card, the card they discard is random. Getting
Hmm.
back a servant doesn't matter if you randomly discard it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I very very big fan of the card. It really feels like it pulled the deck together. There's plenty of turns that I would even just play multiple on the field regardless of the harmony costs and just force them to discard two cards and then pitch the second one.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's some other deck choices that you made that I also was ending up trending towards was the Haniel at the beginning. It just gives you a little bit more extra gas that you need, plus finding the opposite piece of either the Gagiel or the Hijikata is pretty important to get that sort of like mini combo to go off. And I also agree with the Song of Wixoss choices that you've made there. It does feel like you were saying the draw discard filtering is really great, but you just need a little bit more gas to get you to that late game status, right?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. And when I was testing, because I originally did test with Chime, um, I was running into a lot of cases where I just don't have the hand to finish the game. If I'm playing against No Limit and they hit me with a Ray 2 or something like that, I'm down two cards. It's really tough to make decisions when I've only got like, one or two cards in my hand at absolute
Hmm.
max.
Hmm.
But the thing that Song of Wheatcross really did for me was, it is an attack phase piece as well. And getting servants with this deck is so incredibly important. So if I'm staring down a hand where I don't have a servant, I can try and dig for one in the attack phase.
Hmm.
I can, get more options for the following turn, either turn 3 or 4, and just play a whole field. And discarding at the end of the turn doesn't matter if I've already gotten all the use out of the hand that I needed all those cards for anyway.
Yeah, totally. So I'm gonna hit you with the hard hitting questions here, rapid pace. Three Lancelot seems crazy, but it might be right. Why'd you come to that decision?
So I agree that it feels crazy. Because one of the things I always looked at with Lancelot was like, this is like if you're playing this card, you're playing 4 of it. You need it. But in this deck, with all of the card filtering that I'm constantly doing, having that many Lancelots didn't I didn't necessarily need 4 of them to hit one of them every single game. Like my level 2 field is extremely consistently one Gagiel, one Lancelot, and then one of, Regalicus or Bronze or Haniel or something like that. One of the level 1s in the deck. But
Hmm.
I pretty sure I played a Lancelot every single game, and between one Lancelot, and the assist Elrigs and things like that, I can open up the lanes that I need to. But as the game goes on, less and less things on the field can be hit by Lancelot, especially if I'm playing against a Nova deck. So just sort of cutting down the number by one, but increasing the amount that I can dig through my deck constantly with Gagiel or Regalicus or things like that. I see them when I need them, but I don't get flooded by them, which is really, really good.
As a Nova player, one of the things that I was commonly doing, and this also feels crazy, is I was often looking at the field of someone, and they would have out a Gagiel, they'd have out like I don't know, Hijikata, something cool, something good, maybe even a squid, right? And I got to get that thing off the field. They can't put it back to their hand. When I would Nova grow, I'd see the Lancelot, and I'd go, yeah, you could put that Lancelot back in your hand, which is like a thing I would never do before. I would never bounce a Lancelot so they could rebuy the effect, but the effect's not doing anything in that matchup.
Right, for sure. It's just kind of a dead card. At that point, it might as well just be red enter. So
yeah. So okay, that's totally a fair point. Another one here is the Kagatsuchi. You've got a one of. I think that's right, but tell me more about it.
So I think that was probably single-handedly the best addition to the deck that I made leading in. So I took this deck, an earlier version of this deck, to my locals the Saturday before the ceremony. So the day after release, I already sort of had the deck planned I wanted to build and had it ready to go, got my stuff on release day and slapped it together and went in. And I have a local player by the name, he goes by Dusel online. I'm pretty sure you played him in the last ceremony.
I did.
He's an incredible player. And I played against him. I lost, and we just sort of sat down and talked about the choices in the deck. Now, Kagatsuchi was a card that I've played in Hirona since the very beginning. Being able to grab a Nobunaga and then rise on top of Kagatsuchi with it at like key times is really, really, really good. Or, grab a Rose Quartz or anything like that. But you can turn, if you've got a Kagatsuchi in your hand, you can turn a dead card draw of 2 cards into a level 3 of your choice and just really take the opponent by surprise with it. So he had talked about, because I was already running a single Nobunaga, but it's pretty inconsistent to just be running one copy of a card and no other way to search for it, regardless of all the card filtering I have. It's very likely that the card might just end up in my life cloth and I just lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So he had mentioned that he thought Kagatsuchi might be a good choice. And I thought about it and I was like, I mean, I was already running it in Hirona. It's almost a perfect fit here. Especially because this deck is already kind of light on level 3s compared to a lot of other decks that I've toyed with. So, and, combined with things like Song of Wixoss, drawing 3 cards and then pitching 2 of them for a level 3 of my choice is great. Especially when it's Nobunaga. I think during the ceremony, I won 3 of my games of doing Kagatsuchi into Nobunaga, double crushing, and then using Glory Grow on 0 life cloth for the win.
Yeah, that's high praise. I was not super sold on Nobunaga and Rei, but you're tempting me on it.
It doesn't seem like it would be a good fit, right? Obviously, you're running like a blue-centric deck, and this is such a heavy red card that you really need to be all in on. But just having the one that you can either hold in your hand and play later, or holding Kagatsuchi so you can have the option of bringing it back at the point where your opponent ends up being tapped out on their assists, or they don't have enough enter to pay for something, either because they've already paid out for a lot, or you sort of deny them a little bit with raise once per turn or something like that. And then you can just slap down a Nobunaga when they're least expecting it at the key point and just steal 2 life cloth out from underneath their nose. I stole a lot of games that way that I definitely would not have won without. And obviously come in, vanish in 8k too. Like if Nova lets down their guard for even a second and they need to put down like a level 1 or something like that just for a turn, Nobunaga can steal that, and then that's an open lane. If Nova's already tapped out, they have their once per turn ability already going, once per turn ability with sucking up the 7 and getting the servant back every turn and things like that. Once that's online, they're sort of defenseless.
Yep, you're right.
All I need is a single lane opened, which Rei can do super easily compared to Hirana because of her once per turn ability.
Mhm.
Um, I can just slap a Nobunaga down and I can open up, 2 life cloth, and I just sort of sit and wait on Glory Grow until the key point, again, that sort of matchup. And, after opening up 2 with Nobunaga, sometimes that's the perfect time and I can just steal a game that way. And I found that's been super effective.
Totally. All right, so 2 more questions here about the deck composition, and then we'll talk about stuff maybe you might want to change in the future. You're running 2 Burning Infernos, which I'm not going to question that decision. It seems like a good choice. I don't think running the full set of 4 is correct in Rei. That's what I was trending to when I was doing my Gauntlet stuff. But the question that I have to ask you is there a world where you want did you ever find that you had too much removal in your main deck for Rei? You might swap those for something like Random Drain or something instead.
So I never felt like I had too much, I would say. I always felt like I had kind of just enough.
Hmm.
And I think the reason for that is because my card filtering, giving me better card quality, sort of really supported having, just even though I only have, like 2 Rose Quartz, 2 Deafening Inferno, pretty low numbers in the grand scheme of things. If that card was a dead card for me, I could just pitch it and hopefully get something else with Gagiel, Regalicus, whatever. They would just be key cards that I could get rid of.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the other thing that was really helpful is that at the absolute worst case, those cards are red enter, which really feeds into the Rose Quartz double red removal
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
Nobunaga double red double crush. So I did need that little burst of red in the deck to sort of close that up together. Like bronze does a lot of work by itself, being the double color level 1,
Hmm.
but really just the extra sprinklings up with the spells and the couple copies of the level 3s and the 3 Lancelots, they really help me sort of get to the ability to pay for the abilities that I need, even if it's only once or twice in the game.
Yeah, totally. Arguably, I just did a quick count on yours. Your deck probably runs main deck 9 removal, and I'm sure if you plugged that into a hyper geometric calculator, and based on the amount of filtering that you said you draw quite a bit, you'll find that that number is probably the right number to hit the correct amount of I need to open up this many lanes to do this damage thing. So yeah, you're probably super right on that front. The last one, and this is the one that gave me the most trouble whenever I was testing just Rei at the Gauntlet at the locals. How often do you use Rei's once a game ability to discard? Because to me, it felt like I was only doing it 50% of the time, if that.
I think in the ceremony, I might have only done it 2 or 3 times in the entire ceremony.
Hmm.
It's definitely not something I shoot for every single game, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons, at least when it comes to the ceremony, is the prevalence, the perceived prevalence maybe of Xenocluster. I think, um, at least me personally, I'm more afraid of that card than I actually saw it. Um, just not as many people running it as I expected to. But
Hmm.
um, there's the fear there that, like I said earlier, this deck can dance around Xenocluster very, very easily for a lot of the game. But one thing I can't dance around it with is her once per game. So if I successfully avoid Xenocluster the entire game, and then at the very end, at the very last turn, I go all in to make my opponent discard their hand, and I pitch my hand,
Hmm.
um, then they just Xenocluster and draw 3. That could cost me the game. I'm out of cards. I'm out of options.
Certainly, yeah.
The other problem with it is that her once per game directly conflicts with Firefly Squid.
Hmm.
Um, I need to tap an Akino to put a Firefly Squid in. Firefly Squids are extremely, they're a key part of the strategy for me to have them on the field, accruing advantage sort of
Hmm.
passively,
Hmm.
and still being 12k bodies that they have to respond to. Um, but the moment I play a Firefly Squid on my turn, I lose the ability to use my once per game because I need to have both of my level 2 assists tapped down to use it.
Hmm.
And the third thing that really sort of clinches it is that, like what you would kind of do in any other deck, but I felt like I had to sort of obsess over it with Rei a little bit. I hold off on using my level 2 assist as long as humanly possible.
Certainly, certainly.
And like I think that's just good practice. Like you don't want to overcommit your resources super early on because it leaves you defenseless. But I really depended on the holes that those assists opened up. So by the time I use them, my hand might be too small to use the once per game, or it's just not a valid option or something like that. Song of Wixoss can help that a bit because, again, that's a draw 3, and combined with my 2 cards for the turn, if by the time I finish replacing some stuff on the field if I need to, and then I pitch my whole hand, that could be 3 or 4 cards that they lose, more if there's a Firefly Squid on the field. But it just came up that it wasn't something I shot for most of the time.
Yeah. Well, that makes me more confident to hear that you also found that same sort of feeling. Like for a deck that crucially cares about trying to conserve its card advantage and not destroy its gas, that ability sort of goes opposite of what the deck itself feels like it wants to do.
Right. Absolutely.
So okay, real quick, we're going to do this 5 minutes. Some of our viewers like it when we just like one sentence, go through the deck's game plan, so that way they can take notes and they can start piloting it more successfully. Especially in Wecross when there's so little gameplay videos for people to watch. Sometimes people just don't understand the step-by-step procedure of the deck. So just 5 minutes. If you were going to go ahead and start off with what you're looking for when you're opening your hand, a couple sentences, what would you say you're looking for?
The number one thing is level 1s. Level 1s and guards. So the guards are obviously a part of the level 1 package, but those 2 things entirely. I will keep literally nothing else. If I open with no level 1s, I won't even look at the hand. I pitch it back immediately. Because you do not run a blue assist for extra card draw on turn 1, you are super, 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 super reliant on opening a hand that can start playing immediately without any additional. What you draw is what you have. I need Hanael. Is Haniel and a servant and one other level 1 would be pretty much ideal. Haniel replacing herself for the 1 enter, a servant to guard the first attack, and then another level 1 to fill the field. But honestly, any 2 level 1s would do, just preferably a servant. If I have to dig for a servant with Haniel, that I'll do that too. But
sweet. So you basically got into what I was going to ask you next, which was the turn 1. You're looking to put out a Haniel and something else. Usually,
yes. I'd put a lot of value on bronze in this deck, just because the double color getting that Signy vanished is not that big of a deal to you, because you need the red to pay for things starting even turn 2 with the Deafening Inferno there.
I also found that in a lot of the other decks that I was playing, the level 1 multicolors are becoming more important because you sit them out there to get vanish specifically.
Right, 100%. And yeah, Haniel on turn 1, like I said, you don't have assist options to draw you more cards. So Haniel getting you just that one little extra card, as well as paying out the 1 enter to put a card in your discard pile, I think is more valuable than a lot of people might pick up on. I can't count the amount of times playing other decks that I've bursted like a Servant or a Kagatsuchi or something on turn 1 with the opponent attacking into me, and I just have nothing in the discard pile to pick up. Certainly. If I discard something with Regalicus or pay something out with Hanael, there's at least an option for me to get in the early game.
And are you using your 2 assists for removal at any point during this turn 1?
On turn 1, if I'm not doing a Deafening Inferno or something like that, and I'm obviously going second, so I guess I'm on the attack. I would use 1 probably to open up, and the early damage in this deck is extremely important, because if I'm playing against Hirina, I need to try and at least match Hirina's pace or outrace Hirina, and Hirina's opening the board every single turn. And if I'm playing against Nova, I need to squeak the damage in where I can, so I can try and close the game out later on with a lot less work. Hopefully, I'd rather them enter level 3 at like 3 or 4 life than have them creep in at like 5 or 6, and then it's just impossible to sneak any damage in.
Totally. So this deck doesn't really do anything, turn 2 necessarily, or during turn 1 defense step, let's say. So when you go into your turn 2, what are you looking to do? Are you looking to put together like a Hijikata combo or something, or a Lancelot combo? What are you looking to do?
So At first, I thought I was going to be focusing more on the Hijikatas with this deck, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end when we're talking about changes I might make. But what I found ended up being the option, the right play in a lot of the matchups I ended up playing was just sort of playing really offensively. So either I'm trying to vanish things, my level 1 assists, Deafening Inferno, like I said a bit ago, a Lancelot is almost always on my field when I hit level 2. And if none of those, then I'm just card filtering. Gagiel, Regalicus, prepping for my level 3 turn as much as possible. If I do not need a card, you have to think ahead a little bit more in this deck than you might otherwise, because you're doing so much drawing and discarding and things like that. But I'll try and envision a place where I need to be for the next turn or two and pitch the cards that aren't going to help me get there.
Certainly, certainly. And then, so you're playing pretty aggressively on your turn 2. You're opening up a lane where you can. You're probably conserving 1 or 2 of your level 2 L rigs, which brings us to the level 2 defense step. You've got attack phase timing on your level 2 L rigs. Are you looking to blow them? Are you looking to conserve them? Are you willing to give up life? What are you at with that level 2 defense?
So, one of the things I found is that early, early servants, early damage reduction in this deck is very, very, very important. If I'm staring down a field that looks like they might only take me down like 2 life cloth or something, either because they couldn't open the whole field up, or I'm looking like I have a servant in my hand or something like that, um, then I would probably not use them. I'm not afraid of taking damage. I like to enter level 3 with like 3 or 4 life cloth, because those numbers feel pretty safe. I can survive on that for a turn or two, especially if I conserve my assists.
Mm-hmm.
But if the early game did not go very well, like I did not see servants, or I didn't have any life bursts or things like that, which is in a lot of games I assume I'm going to hit a lot, because a lot of the level 1s in this deck that you're keeping off mulligan have a lot of your life bursts, unfortunately. So it makes the amount of life bursts that actually make it into the life burst pile a little bit less than I would see in something like Hirana or something like that. So you can just take a lot of damage in this deck. So if I do pop a level 2 assist to save me, it's usually Akino. And that might be that usually ends up being because my deck isn't super enter heavy in the beginning of the game, because I'm not doing a ton of Lancelots and Romales and Deafening Infernos constantly. Usually maybe just like one of those, and then opening the rest up with my level 1 assists. So
Yep.
I might have the enter to do the full ability for Akino to get that servant back and conserve 1 damage off the Elrig attack, which really helps me stabilize a bit going into level 3. But I would prefer to not have to use my level 2s. If I can enter level 3 with like 3 or 4 health cloth, that's kind of where I want to be.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting, and I think super valid advice for anyone playing this Rei deck is that they can be a little bit more brave for that type of thing. Let's then get into level 3. Yeah, so you're starting your level 3. What are you wishing is drawn in your hand? What are you looking to do?
So since I try and conserve my level 2s as much as possible, I'm usually working with very, very little limit to actually work, like shape a field here.
Certainly,
So the things I tend to end up doing, Firefly Squid is absolutely ideal if I can get one of those on the board. A Gagiel, and then some level 1 bronze would be really great, because that red enter at the end of the game is super important for me, either for Rose Quartz or Nobunaga, or a Deafening Inferno. Squeak in that lane where I can, and hopefully sneak in with like a Nobunaga or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, ideally, it's pretty much Firefly Squid, and then something else that's going to draw me a card. Because, well, I guess the turn I enter level 3, I only need Firefly Squid, because Rei's going to draw me the 1 for her once per turn. But most other turns where I'm sitting at level 3, I need to get 2 cards somehow. And
Mm-hmm.
Firefly Squid is great for that, because that's going to get me 1. Gagiel, Regalicus can get me another. Song of Wixoss can do the whole ability by itself. But yeah, the main key here is Firefly Squid, and then probably like a Gagiel, and then something else to fill the board.
Yeah, totally. And so I think the Wecross is a game of am I winning on turn 3 or am I winning much later than turn 3? So I assume you're based on what you're saying, you're a little bit later than a turn 3 deck.
I'm definitely later than a turn 3 deck. definitely in the ceremony, I don't think I had any absolute blowout games like that where I won right at turn 3. Usually for me, it ends up being more of like a turn 4, turn 5, just because my defensive capabilities with this deck are a lot better than
Certainly.
when I was playing Hirina. Hirina, playing Hirina for months and months, I'm so used to having one defensive Elrig, and that's all I get. But in this deck, with being able to pack Hirina Stamp and Akino Bye Bye both, also getting me back the Servant there, ideally, I just have a lot of defensive power and offensive as a result of that, because they open up slots that I can actually swing some damage into. So
Yeah,
the game goes a bit longer for me.
and I'm gonna wager a guess here that 100% of the time you've never activated Hirina Stamp's second ability.
I have not done it yet. No.
Okay, cool. I was just making sure, because if anyone did, it would be you, and I just wanted to know. Outside of that, so you're getting to turn 4, turn 5, you're getting to your late game. What are you looking to do in the final steps of this game to finalize it, to end it?
So I think the biggest difference in this deck versus the other aggressive decks I've played, especially Hirina, I'm not really using my offensive piece right away. Glory Grow in this case. When I was playing Hirina, as soon as I hit level 3, I want to keep pumping damage. I want to keep the tempo of the game going. So it was like, go to level 3, Glory Grow, clear the board, swing as much damage in as possible, try and end the game or end the game next turn. With this deck, I'm kind of playing more of the long game, because when I Glory Grow, I either want to hit them at 2 life cloth and take them to 0 and then clear the game next turn, because in
Sure.
that case, that gives me the opportune moment to use the Rei once per game, discard their hand, hopefully they have no servant or something, and be able to clutch the game that way. Or I want to use the Glory Grow just to hit them for an unguardable attack when they're already at 0. So I'm not really using Glory Grow to keep the tempo of the game going like I did with Hirina. I'm more of using that as like a wait, bake it for 2-3 turns, and then use that to sort of be the final gas that will clinch the game for me. And that's especially important against Nova, because getting damage in against that deck is so hard. Being able to just whittle them down to 2 life cloth and then take them to 0 immediately, or whittle them down to 0 life cloth with something like Double Crush on Nobunaga when they're not expecting it, and then hitting them with an unblockable attack. That's how I closed a lot of those games out. So
Yeah, okay, that's a good game end state. I agree. I'm sure all of our people who are wanting to play Rei, or are playing Rei and needed more advice, loved that 5 minutes. But if you can give me another 1 minute for literally everyone else who wants to beat Rei, what are Rei's weaknesses?
I would say the biggest weakness against this deck is aggression. I'm playing this deck as sort of like, it's like almost here in a light, where I'm still pushing a whole lot of aggressive gameplay style, but I can't do it as well as Hirina. So what I have to do is sort of make the quality of my hand a lot better, give myself more options, see a lot more of my deck than I would normally. But while that's a good thing, where I feel like my game plan is a lot more consistent, it's also bad because I just don't have the vanishing power that Hirina does. If you out aggro me, I can't really keep pace with you. The other thing is that because I don't run a blue assist Elrig, I can't refill my hand very easily unless I'm using Haniel or Song of Wixoss. And Song of Wixoss, I'm going to lose 2 cards at the end of the turn if I'm not using my entire hand up or something like that. So if you hit me with a lot of card discard, hand destruction, I lose a lot of the power and options that I was talking about earlier, because I no longer have any options. And I feel like this deck is particularly weak against that, because I have no way to refill my hand. Without Ray Assist like I'm used to in No Limit, I just can't draw a bunch of extra cards. I can card filter, but I can't get extra cards.
All right, sweet. And last question: you were taking this deck to the not to 0-4, but to the end of this meta. What are you looking to change out? What are you looking to change out for Rei?
So one of the most interesting things for me was Hijikata was sort of when I changed the deck over from like random drains and like the blue-white package and things like that, to more of like the aggressive version. I thought Hijikata would be a really good pick to like continue pushing that hand destruction during attack phase. I have cards in the deck that support it, like Tobiel. Tobiel is sort of there to not only activate Raise once per game, but also when Tobiel swings, she can make Hijikata bigger, so I can still get discards off against Nova at the end of the game when they build up their big tanky wall and I can't swing over 12Ks anymore. Tobiel kind of would let me. But the more aggressive I played with this deck, the more I found myself not using Hijikata. And one of the big problems is it's just really, really awkward in the current build. I was sort of mentioning what my level 2 game looked like in terms of like Gagael, Lancelot, and then a level 1, but you'll notice that Hijikata doesn't really fit in there. If I'm opening something up with Lancelot, well, then I can't play a Hijikata there. Gagael can turn Hijikata on, but I need to play Lancelot. But I'm conserving my assists until late in the game, so I don't have the limit to put 3 level 2s. It just ended up being these really awkward games, board states where I couldn't fit Hijikata in. So that would be the first card I'm looking at possibly swapping out, and I don't really know what I'd want to swap it to yet, because I feel like the life bursts in this deck are so set in stone between Haniel, Regalicus, Servant, Gagael. Like that's already 16 slots. Where what do I do with the last 4 cards? I can't really touch that 20 cards of the deck. It just leaves the other 20, and there's not a lot of good wiggle room here. So Hijikata would have worked a lot better if I kept Chime in, but I just needed those extra cards for Song of Wixoss. So I'm currently exploring cards. I'm still looking around. I haven't found a good replacement yet, and maybe I won't replace it because still being able to threaten a 10k that can do some attack phase hand destruction is great. But right now, it wasn't really pulling its weight like I expected it to, and I just don't have a good replacement for it yet.
Yeah, that's totally fair. You might be very right about that. You're saying that you might need some more red, so theoretically you could shave maybe a few of them off to do a multicolor 10k. But you're right. Sometimes you just have an awkward card in the deck, and you're like, "Yep, it's just not an incomplete. It's just not a complete deck yet, but we'll get there."
Right, and just I guess a little peek behind the curtain. One of the cards I've really been thinking about is I think it's Appetite Natural Crystal. It's the one that's 8k level 2. When it's targeted by an ability of the opponent, you draw a card. Well, that's really great for me because one of the big problems of the deck is drawing cards. Having a card that can replace itself that way and still threaten an 8k on the board might be an option. I'm not sure if it's the way to go yet. I haven't gotten to do a lot of testing yet, but that's one of the first cards I was looking at if I was going to replace Hijikata.
Great. Last thing I wanted to talk about was, you and I talked a little bit on Discord prior. We got matched up together in one of the 3 round 7 reshuffles, and so we played like a half a game before we were like, oh, I guess I'll see you later. And I felt bad because I really wanted to play the Nova versus Rei matchup, and I don't have a ton of experience in it. But we talked a little afterwards on Discord, and we discussed that. There's a world where Rei is people are sleeping on it. They don't recognize that it has got a pretty good matchup against Nova, and that it could be the missing link to make that cycle of that rock paper scissors that people are looking for. Right now, we seem to be heavily skewed towards aggression and control, but we need some wall breakers as well. Rei's one of those. So, do you think that Rei's time to shine is right now? Do you think it's always going to be never not so quite as good as the other two, or do you think really people are sleeping on it? What do you think?
So I definitely think people are sleeping on it right now. I think a lot of the focus is either on Hirana because it's easy to build and it's aggression. It's a lot easier for people to pick up and just sort of play and go. Or Nova because people like the look of Nova. People like the different play style of the deck. It's just kind of the new hotness right now, and I think those two are really overshadowing a lot of the rest of the playing field. We even saw stuff like Tamago pop up in this ceremony, and I don't think a lot of people really expected that. And I think because a lot of people's focus is on just sort of those 2 decks, and Diagram being a bit more popular now too. But I think Rei sort of fell by the wayside, and not a lot of people looked at it. I do think she's very strong. I think she's strong against Nova, especially. But I think the gameplay is pretty tight. I think it's not super forgiving. You don't have a lot of chances to get in and do damage, but when you can, the damage is very explosive.
Mm.
And I do find that I can at least consistently get the holes. Where when I was playing Hirina, I couldn't depend on opening up a hole. At least with Ray's once per turn ability, I can depend on hitting one at some point, and I just need to learn how to capitalize on that as best as possible. So yeah, I think the deck's very strong, but it's very dependent on how aggro heavy I think the meta is going to be going forward into the next ceremony, especially. If we see a lot more people jump off ship from Hirina, I think this deck might still continue to be extremely solid, and a good pick for people to learn with. But if people, stick to their guns, or we see more people going towards Hirina or things like that, or even other aggressive style decks, this deck might struggle a bit. So I think it's really a meta call. You've kind of got to keep a pulse on the community a little bit and see what the rumblings are, in the different discords, and what people are talking about running, and what your locals look like and things like that. But I think regardless of everything, regardless of all that, I think the deck is very fun. I think it would help players learn a lot about the game, even if you're not necessarily looking at like a super competitive mindset. I feel like there's a lot of interesting decision points playing this deck, and it feels like it made me a better player piloting it too. So I'd highly recommend it. I think it's a very fun build.
I agree with you on all your points. It seems like there is going to be a trend towards Nova, and it feels like a natural rebalancing would be then a trend towards Ray if I was a betting guy. But yeah, thank you for everything, Kevin. You have helped, I think, a lot of people learn the ins and outs of Ray, as well as maybe what to do on the next ceremony, and probably shot yourself in the foot because maybe you might have a harder time if you bring Ray
Oh, I'm
again.
sure.
But I can't tell you. You actually, interestingly enough, right? I'm a pretty big Nova fan here. I've been enjoying it since my 5th place, and I'm like, ooh, but what if I put Ray together for the next one? You got me thinking, and
Right.
I love that.
I think it's cool to consider. Even if you don't end up running it, I think it's good to like learn about the deck and practice against it or practice with it or a little bit or things like that. But I think it's worth building and just really toying around with a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. So, Kevin, as is per tradition now, with guests on the podcast, do you want to do the sign off?
Sure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Really appreciate the chance being on. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you, and may you always flip a life first.
All right, man, you did it. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you very much.